Hi team, welcome to the Kindness, Curiosity and Comfortable Shoes podcast. My name is James McFetrich and this is an ongoing toolkit for all healthcare staff. Whether you are a porter or a paediatrician, a domestic or a driver, clinical or non-clinical, just starting or just finishing your work in healthcare, this podcast aims to give you some useful thoughts about working for this amazing business to get you through your day. Thank you so much for listening. I hope these thoughts are useful and the podcast is fulfilling its purpose as a toolkit for all healthcare workers. So before we start, if you enjoy listening to this podcast, please tell other people, tell your co-workers, share what you like about it. Go on, put it in your work WhatsApp group. Go on, do it now, then it's done. And feel free to follow at JMac Education on Facebook, X, Instagram, LinkedIn, Threads, whatever your social media preference is, and you'll get more information related to the podcasts and other JMac Education updates. Thank you. Welcome to Compilation episode 5. In this compilation, there'll be 5 episodes. 5 episodes. So firstly, Ikigai. I'll explain all about that. Error, leadership, assessment, and refocus. Hope it's interesting and useful for you. And please listen away, enjoy hearing them all back to back without having to reload and listen to the intro and outro over again. Hope this is a useful way of summarizing all the Kindness, Curiosity and Comfortable Shoes podcasts. Thank you. Ikigai, that is the title of this week's podcast. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Ikigai, Ikigai. So I'd not heard of this until I came across it looking at some tools for a client I am currently coaching. And as a complete side note, part of my business is in coaching and working through work-related issues with people in healthcare. So please feel free to contact me if you're interested in exploring that further and looking for coaching for yourself or anyone that you work with. If you contact me on the podcast email, that's hellokccpodcast@gmail.com. Sorry, I completely aside there. So back to the podcast. Ikigai. That is this Japanese concept of finding fulfilment or purpose in life. And like I say, I came across this by accident, and there are books and books on this, a whole rabbit warren of information about living your life infused with meaning and lots of other different summaries, but that's the one I like the most of all. But what really made me sort of want to look into this further, the aspect that I loved and understood as soon as I saw it, was a diagram showing 4 ingredients of Ikigai. And they consist of what you love, what the world needs, what you can be paid for, and what you are good at. And if you think of those as 4 circles, the area of your life where those 4 circles intersect is Ikigai. And it's been around in Japan as a concept for nearly 1,000 years, and it's been linked to the longevity of some people in some areas of Japan, especially in Okinawa, an island south of Japan. And certainly in Western culture, it's been popularized over the last 10, 20 years. I'm sure, like all these things, I'm sure it's far more deep and complex than presented in most English language information about it. But I thought it would be interesting to explore, and I think there's certainly some relevance for healthcare and thinking about how we work in the environments that we work in and how to make sure we are living a fulfilled working life. So, as I say, there are these 4 intersecting circles, and even if just 2 circles intersect, areas where you have a common interest with both of those ingredients that can help us understand a bit about how we approach work. If the circle that includes what you love intersects with what the world needs, that is equivalent to your mission in life or your working life. If what fits into your circle about what the world needs and what you can be paid for, that is your vocation. If what you can be paid for and what you are good at intersect, that would translate as your profession. And if what you are good at and what you love intersect, that would be your passion. So we've got those areas where those circles may intersect, and what we're aiming for to achieve Ikigai, if I'm understanding it correctly, that it is something you can achieve, is that all those circles will intersect. So you will be doing something with your life that has passion, that is a profession, that is a vocation, and also is a mission. And I was really intrigued by this because currently, at this moment in time, I can be quite smug and think that the majority of my work has equal balance of all of those areas. But certainly looking back over my working life, I don't think it's been like that. I do wonder whether professions with long periods of training, like many aspects of healthcare, I wonder how much you can centre yourself in those 4 areas because of that length of training, and maybe that applies a different focus because of that specific goal attainment by virtue of doing the training. And the other thing that got me thinking is that a lot of the self-help and good life guidance that's out there that has really exploded in the past few years is there's not much that acknowledges that it's nice and important to be paid. Trying to live a good life, if you read newspaper articles and things like that, will often focus on other areas without acknowledging that actually to live in this life, whether we like it or not, being paid is important. So thinking about the specifics of healthcare and these 4 areas about what you love, what the world needs, what you can be paid for, and what you're good at, I think we can agree that if we work in healthcare, we're definitely covering what the world needs. Whatever aspect of work you do within healthcare, you're contributing to the health of the nation that you work in, and especially of the individuals that you deal with. And because you work in it, you're getting paid for it. So that is what the world needs, what you can be paid for. That is your vocation. I'm not sure it's always clear how that ties in with what you are genuinely good at and what you love. And there's so many opportunities in healthcare. I think sometimes we can lose that sense of trying to find what we are good at. It's not always easy. And because of the vocational and professional aspects of healthcare work, I see in a lot of people that I work with that we often sacrifice what we love because we're doing it for the good of the world around us, that vocational aspect. And I clearly don't want to underrepresent this concept. This is a very superficial, very quick look at some of these aspects. And it may be something that you want to look at further. So I've put some links in the show notes to sites that I found interesting. There's one that has a nice diagram explaining Ikigai, and one that has a lot of articles looking at it from different perspectives, certainly explaining it a bit more, and also looking at ways that you can try and find your Ikigai. So I hope that's useful. And there are plenty of other aspects that I'm not covering here. There are certain pillars such as being active, being in the moment, finding joy in small things of life, finding flow, all of which clearly is important and that Japanese culture embraces and has been taken up by Western lifestyle coaches, and you'll find plenty of information about those with a fairly quick Google search. However, if this has piqued your interest and it's something that you may feel that you are out of balance, it may be interesting to reflect where you are in relation to those 4 main areas of Ikigai and where you may need to think about whether you can redress that balance between what you love, what the world needs, what you can be paid for, and what you are good at. And if you are out of that balance, is there something perhaps related to what you do to help re-center yourself? And as I say, I suspect there's a bit more in healthcare about pulling more of what you love and what you are good at into your role at work. That's certainly what I felt reflecting back on my career, that those were areas that I hadn't paid much attention to. And for myself, certainly a lot more centered and happy in my work because I've appreciated, without knowing what Ikigai was, appreciating that is an important part to have fulfillment in my work. So I hope you find that interesting, maybe something you've not come across before, and something that you may want to follow some of the links in the show notes to explore that a bit further and analyse a bit about your working life. This episode is all about error, and I'm going to tell you a story about when I was training in emergency medicine many years ago and I missed a fracture. I reviewed an x-ray, didn't see what turned out to be a very clear fracture, and gave the patient advice on the basis that they had no bony injury. The next day they returned to the department and the correct treatment was given for the fracture that was clearly there. And to reassure you, the patient came to no significant harm as the result of this, but understandably put in a complaint about me. That's a story about error that clearly puts me at fault at the centre of this, which in some ways I was. However, at the time, I was pretty upset about how this was handled because there was so much more to the case than what I've just described. And subsequently, when I have investigated incidents and errors and complaints as a more senior clinician, I've been very clear to make it my duty to understand the whole situation about what's going on. There's a lot more going on than just a failure to interpret an x-ray correctly. So for clarity and full disclosure, I have altered some details about this case to anonymise the patient involved. And obviously at the time, the complaint was fully investigated by the department I was working in. So the more complete story of what happened is this. I was the most senior doctor in the department and indeed in the hospital for managing this type of injury and presentation. It was 11 o'clock at night on a busy Friday night in the emergency department. I'm sure you can guess what that may feel like. The department was full and it was one of those evenings where there were just more and more patients coming in as our workforce was reducing to cover what should have been a more simple night shift. So given that background, the nurse in triage came to find me and I was in the middle of managing a few other patients and supervising other doctors, and I was interrupted from this just to give a quick assessment of this patient. And I was told this patient had stumbled off a curb, rolled their ankle, and now couldn't put weight through their leg. And could I organise an x-ray? Which I duly did. It helped that individual. It was one of a few straightforward presentations that we could turn around quite quickly with me going on the information I was given from triage. And just to be clear, ideal practice, I should have examined the patient myself before ordering the x-ray. But you know how it is. You try and help out where you can in a busy situation. Later on, I was told the x-ray had been taken and could I review it because I'd already had an interaction with that patient's pathway through the department. Well, of course, that makes sense. I mean, we could manage and finalise treatment for one more patient. That's a win for everyone. So I looked at the x-ray looking for injuries around the ankle and I could see none. So I went to find the patient with the knowledge in my head that they had a soft tissue injury of their ankle. So I went to a cubicle to assess someone, thinking I knew in my head what I would find before I saw them. Again, not great clinical practice. I had a chat to them. I confirmed that they had a roll off the curb, they didn't have any other injuries. Yes, they were very sore around their ankle, which clearly made examination very difficult, and I gave them advice for their sprained ankle, discharged them, and moved on. So the injury they actually had was a calcaneal fracture. That's the big bone that forms the heel and sits just underneath the ankle joint. And usually these injuries are caused by a fall from a height landing directly onto the heel. So just to be clear, the way in which I wasn't as good a doctor as I could have been, I didn't examine them before requesting an x-ray. I didn't look at the x-ray looking for all potential injuries. And I walked into the room with a predetermined understanding of what I thought was going on without looking at all the facts that are available to me. So what mitigating factors are there? Because that's the point of all this, that there were things that I should have done better, absolutely. But also, there are lots of strange things that happened that are often a part of errors if you've been involved in them or if you're involved in investigating them. Really important to understand these. So this is a really unusual injury. It, in inverted commas, shouldn't occur purely by rolling your ankle. It's an unusual mechanism of injury to get this kind of fracture. Clearly, the department was really busy. I was the only senior there. I had a lot of workload on. I had a lot of what we often think of as bandwidth being taken up because I clearly just wasn't managing that patient. I think from recollection of the investigation, there are about 70 or 80 patients in the department at that time, all of whom at any point could have been discussed with me. When I was first asked about that patient, I had an interruption in my flow of work. Not through any maliciousness, but purely trying to help that individual patient and manage that little part of the work that was going on in the department. And also, from my perspective, I was trying to be helpful. I wasn't doing anything malicious, but that meant that I wasn't doing my job properly. And that's a key point where, looking back, I could have altered the path of this. That perhaps in the context of the rest of the department and in the knowledge of what pressures I would have as an individual, when I was asked to quickly request an x-ray, that maybe I should have asked that for a minor injury, they should join the queue and wait their turn. But if I do that, I know, and these kind of things are replicated in all sorts of specialties, but especially in emergency medicine, that adds time to that individual's time in the department because they have to wait for an assessment to then get an x-ray. And this is trying to improve the speed at which people come through a department. So what have I learned from this? Well, as a result, with the specifics of the injury, I look at x-rays in a different way. That was a key moment in my training when I realised I need to alter how I assessed x-rays. I scan them for all potential injuries, not just the ones that I'm expecting on the basis of their presentation. But also, it's not just the way I look at x-rays. I teach lots of people about how to look at x-rays in the context of the emergency department. So when I teach people about x-ray interpretation, I can use this as an example about how easy it is to miss an injury when you're not expecting it to be there based on the information that you have about a patient. I also learnt that when I'm interrupted in decision-making, and this is a common problem in all areas of medicine, I pause and make a decision. How necessary is this interruption to completely change my chain of thought, my flow of information that's going into my head? Because if it's not necessary at that time, maybe the correct thing to do is to pause and politely decline to help that specific individual. So that one event over 20 years ago, and since then, I guess I've probably reviewed thousands of x-rays. I've certainly discussed with hundreds of people what I've learned from this, and hopefully to help them learn to avoid making similar errors that I made at that time. But I've also learned in time that being human, that we will make mistakes. That is part and parcel of the way our brains function and the way we work in complex, busy systems. And part of working in any system is there should be something there to help reduce the chance of mistakes. And this is especially true in healthcare. In fact, for this incident, there was one system that kicked in at the same time as the patient returned to the department the next day. There was a call from the X-ray department to ask whether we had reviewed this X-ray, because they had reviewed it, the separate department, the radiology team had reviewed it and determined there was a fracture on there, and they were checking whether we had picked it up. So there is a system to pick up fractures that may have been missed. And that's just one example of a system issue that should try and reduce these errors. And we know these errors occur not just in healthcare, but they have been the root cause of problems, far bigger issues than one individual patient having a delayed diagnosis of a fracture. But issues in the nuclear industry, in the airline industry. And if you want a lighter tale around this kind of area, if it is of interest to you, then there was an Oscar results error a few years ago when, some of you may remember this, when La La Land was mistakenly given the Best Picture Oscar. And there's a great tale that is told in a podcast that I love listening to, Cautionary Tales with Tim Harford. Do look it up. Very interesting tale, and it's a nice podcast to listen to. I'll put the link in the show notes. So, having explored one issue for one person with myself, maybe that sparks your interest in what ways you have to help reduce your errors in whatever areas of practice you have in healthcare. What systems are in place where you work that have been put in to reduce error, and are you able to use them, and do you stick to them? And I think the bottom line, as always, that openness and honesty are really valuable assets to have here. I don't think it's wrong to make honest mistakes, but it really is an error. By far the biggest error is not to learn from them and help other people learn from them too. Thank you for joining me once again for another episode of the Kindness, Curiosity and Comfortable Shoes podcast. We've had a break over the past month just to reset and recharge and get some more inspiration and thoughts for the podcast. So thank you for joining me again. Today we are going to look at leadership. This ties in with a conference talk I'm doing this week, and I thought it'd be quite interesting to distill that down to a few key points that are relevant to how this podcast combines those sometimes intangible aspects of clinical and non-clinical work in healthcare, and the way that I think about leadership does tie in with just that general understanding of how to work well in healthcare, with those thoughts about kindness, curiosity, and comfortable shoes. So with specific thoughts about kindness, firstly, in relation to leadership, it's really easy to forget to be kind. Sometimes with the pressures of work and with certain targets that need to be met, and we've covered that in a previous episode, that ongoing thought about being human and dealing with other humans can easily get forgotten with the pressures of targets or the clinical pressure of an individual patient in front of you. That to work well and as effectively as a team, and certainly if you're leading that team, to remember to be kind to people. Remember they may be having their own personal issues at the time you are liaising with them. They may feel quite stressed about the situation that you are dealing with, whether that's with an individual patient or a managerial situation. And just being kind, and remember that we're all human. We all have our own personal struggles maybe inside or outside of work. And kindness will go a long way to having that empathy that we need to be able to work well with other people. And clearly also, if you are kind to people, then people will be kind to you. And as a leader, that can be really nice to have that bit of feedback and people being empathetic to your needs, rather than it just being one way the whole time. So there is a reason, clearly not the sole reason, to be kind to people, for it to be shone back at you. But it's nice to remember that if we spread a little kindness around, then some of that will be reflected back. And even if it isn't, you will feel better. And there's evidence to show that's the case, that if you're kind to people, even if it is unrequited kindness, that you will feel better as a result of that. By making people feel better around you, you will also feel better. Some of the evidence about kindness relates to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Again, something that I've referred to previously on the podcast. If it's the first time you've come across that, it's this selection of 5 different areas and of life that are important to acknowledge. It talks a lot about in education that you need to acknowledge the bottom layers before people can be comfortable in a situation to learn. And it's the same for a work environment as well. And right at the bottom, you have physiological needs, thinking about people having access to water, to food, to shelter, to sleep, all those standard physiological aspects of life. And if those are attained, the next level is safety needs. That's aspect of personal security, employment, resources, thinking a bit more in depth about your health. Above that is love and belonging. That's friendship, intimacy, family, that sense of connection. Above that is esteem, and that is your own sort of respect for yourself and for others, any status or recognition that you may have. And at the top, that once you have achieved all those levels, there's that actualization of becoming the most or the best that one can be. And that may feel slightly abstract, but it translates very well to work, and especially for kindness, because when we're really under pressure, and I saw this a lot in the emergency department, when you're really working hard, it's easy to forget our own basic biological needs, having something to eat, having a drink, having rest. And the important thing about Maslow's hierarchy is that it's difficult to appreciate those aspects higher up the triangle or the pyramid if you aren't getting those basic levels met. So especially as a leader, if you come in and you want to thank people for the work they've done and acknowledge that they've worked hard, that comes in really quite high up in that esteem level. And superficially, it may be accepted. And you will have definitely worked in places where this has happened, where people come in and thank you and pat everyone on the back, you've done a good job. But the grumbling from the workforce is, well, that's all very well thanking me, but I haven't had a break. I don't feel that I'm paid properly from those sort of employment aspects. I don't feel I belong to this team. And those are in the first 3 layers of the hierarchy. And those need to be acknowledged and dealt with before we can genuinely accept any of those aspects higher up, such as other people showing us respect. So as a leader, if you want to show people that they've done a good job and thank them for it, certainly in my opinion, for that to be accepted and acknowledged, we need to make sure that we are making sure that people have access to food and water and rest, that they are employed properly, that they feel safe at work, they have the resources to do their work properly. Then they have that sense of connection and that teamwork, and only then that esteem level will come into play. And it's worthwhile acknowledging that and thinking about that as a leader. So kindness, easy to forget, really important to acknowledge that it's going to be key to being a good leader, but we, along with being kind, need to remember more basic primitive needs that the people that we work with and ourselves will need. Secondly, there's curiosity, and that whole sense of being curious about those people around you, those people that you work with. Really important in a team to understand people's strengths and weaknesses, ask them about what they can bring to the team, and likewise sharing something about yourself at a level that you feel comfortable doing. And that reflects very much on Johari's window. Again, I think I've talked about this previously, thinking about areas that are known to yourself and unknown to yourself, and areas about yourself that are known to others but also unknown to others. So the areas that we know and that others know is that open area. That's the perhaps very superficial, perhaps very accessible part of ourselves. And the unknown unknowns, the bit that we don't know about ourselves that aren't accessible to other people, are going to be blind to everyone. Key areas to understand in this is the blind spots area, so the bits that we don't know about ourselves but other people do know, and we can only uncover that blind spot by getting feedback. And by getting that feedback, we understand a bit more about ourselves and reduce that blind spot. And an area that's talked about less, the hidden area, things that are known to ourselves but not known to others. The only way that we can let people know about that if we are happy to disclose information. And clearly it's entirely right that we do keep some things known to ourselves, and we may not want to share certain things in a work environment. But if we disclose aspects of ourselves, our personalities, to other people, we reduce that hidden area. And that can be an important way of enhancing friendships and relationships at work, and can only enhance that teamwork that we have. As a leader, you need to have that curiosity about yourself, about what you want to disclose, but also being curious about those who you work with. And we can extend that also to being curious about the decisions that you make as a leader or with your team, analysing that. And certainly when we look at general workload management and decision-making skills, we can be quite good at finding an array of choices to make a difficult decision, but we're not very good at looking back on those decisions and completing that loop to understand our decision-making process. So being curious about that is going to be important as a leader. Finally, wearing comfortable shoes, and the thread throughout everything in the podcast is making sure that we look after ourselves. Genuinely invest in a pair of comfortable shoes, because you're going to be walking in them all day. It's really important to look after ourselves, just in that simple aspect of wearing shoes that aren't going to cause us problems. But it's also a metaphor for investing in yourself. You need to be yourself all day. You need to be true to yourself. And with that, you'll be able to lead a team well and manage a team well. So we need to be aware of the things that are important for us as individuals, so we can look after ourselves. I hope that's a different slant on the kindness, curiosity and comfortable shoes mantra that I have, thinking specifically about how that affects us as leaders. And it's important to sign off that people are all leaders. Everyone who works in healthcare is a leader in some form. There will always be some projects that you will lead, some area of work that may only be small that you are still leading. And for those people who feel that doesn't apply to them, I expect if you look closely at your work, there will be areas where you are a leader. However new you are to healthcare, however junior you feel, there will be aspects where you are leading a small team for a small area of work. And clearly, as we progress through our careers, if that's our want, then that aspect of leadership will become more clear and more obvious. especially in the sort of managerial structure or the clinical structure of the healthcare systems that you work in. Remember, if you'd like to support the Kindness, Curiosity and Comfortable Shoes podcast, please go to buymeacoffee.com/jmaceducation. That's buymeacoffee, all one word, .com/JMAC education. That'd be great. That just helps support the finances that are involved in putting a podcast together. If you go to the podcast page, there's a heart in the top right hand corner that also helps. And if you don't mind doing me a favor, whatever platform you are listening to this podcast on, if you could like, subscribe, follow, all that's really helpful, just so I get a sense of the number of people that are involved in this. And please feel free to contact me at hellokccpodcast@gmail.com if you want to contact me about any of the episodes or possibly any ideas about future episodes. That would be lovely. Thank you. It's getting to that time of year where there seem to be a lot of exams going on, certainly for the medical school undergraduates, and also at the same time there are lots of people in clinical work who are needing assessments done for their portfolios. I appreciate this is very clinically based and perhaps less of interest to non-clinicians listening to the podcast, but I thought it'd be interesting to cover some of the things that I have seen in my experience as an examiner. I guess most people in healthcare have to do exams at some point. I've been examining primarily for undergraduate medical school exams for over 7 years now, and there are a few things that crop up that are easy wins to come across just more professionally if you have to have those kind of face-to-face exams, especially those that are clinically based, but also helpful if you have any workplace-based assessments where your work is going to be observed. There are lots of things that come to mind, so I thought it'd be interesting to do a podcast about those assessments. And funnily enough, exams drive learning, absolutely, and they can be a bit odd in the way that they force us down certain ways of behaving, certain things that we learn about that never seem to crop up in real life. But certainly the tips I'm going to give you will help you be a better clinician and definitely more professional and perhaps even more confident in your clinical work, as well as help you do well in assessments or exams. Now, I'm not going to give any specific details of specific exams that I examine for OSCEs or MOSLAs. There are plenty of other places where you can get that information. I can certainly recommend Geeky Medics videos if you haven't come across that before. I do have a slight conflict of interest that I have done some work for them and they are local to me in the northeast of England, but it's a really fabulous set of resources aimed at medical students, but I think are appropriate for a number of different types of clinicians to really hone those clinical skills that maybe you have to demonstrate in some form of an assessment. These tips are going to be very much what can help you if your assessment is borderline, I guess. As an examiner, even though the exams are set to be as objective as possible, and there are very strict marking criteria, it would be foolish to discount the fact that you are a human demonstrating your clinical skills in front of an examiner who is also human, and often in front of patients or actors who are human, and the interaction between the person being assessed, the person being examined from a clinical perspective, and the person examining and scoring and marking everything. There's so much psychology going on there, and a lot of the subtleties that perhaps aren't listed in these specific areas that must be ticked off, how you check a pulse, for example. There are subtleties about how you interact with people and the expectation of that professional conduct. And to me, that's really key to being a good clinician, and are things that can just up your game. There are also things that will often stand out very much at interview. Just those standard things that just will make you come across better and more professional. and they're fairly straightforward. So I'm just going to go through some of them now. So firstly, there will be some form of dress code. There'll be a dress code for your institution, or there'll be guidance for exams. Please just follow it. I absolutely accept there may be times when you want to demonstrate your individuality by looking different to other people. The day of an exam is not the day to challenge that authority or push boundaries in what you wear or how you style your hair or display a new range of body piercings. There will be guidance for it, especially if you are at a university institution. Please just follow it. Otherwise, you don't know how some people, either the examiner or the patients you're examining, may react. And there's certainly been a number of people who have been pulled up an exam, rightly or wrongly, because they've not followed a dress code. I'm not going to argue the point about that now, but if there is a code that you should be following, please just follow it. Slightly along the same lines, name tags. It's professional to have your name badge visible. You may need to show it to the examiner for confirmation of who you are. But often we have these badges hanging on lanyards around our necks. And when you're examining a patient, if it's hanging around your neck, please don't let it swing against the patient. It's just an annoyance. There's clearly an easy transmission of infection by this route between different patients. Just work out with these scrubs or whatever clothing you're wearing, how are you going to tuck that name badge away? Some people like to do an impressive swing behind their back so it rests on their back. But please just remember to alter the position of your name badge so it's not swinging into people's faces or onto their body. Specifically for clinical exams, when you're going to do an examination of a patient, there's a phrase that is guaranteed to annoy me when people say, "I'm going to ask you." So most exams are time limited, and there is always going to be enough time to complete the task that is needed. But it's still really easy to waste time. And it's really common for people in exams to say, talking to the patient before they do a clinical exam, say, "I'm going to ask you to," and then describe in long detail exactly what's going to happen. And for most examinations, you can just cut down on that preamble. For example, "Can you stand or walk so I can assess your gait, please?" Compared to, "I'm going to ask you to stand and walk normally, then turn around, walk on your heels, then walk on your tiptoes, then turn it." You get the idea. It's, I think, an expression of examination nerves that people need to explain exactly what they're going to do. But don't forget, examiners are there because we have clinical skill and experience and we know the situation that we are examining. So we're able to interpret how you interact with a patient, how you convey instructions to a patient without you having to describe what you're going to do to the patient and then to do it. It's just a waste of time and it's easy to trip yourself up. Thinking about examiners, one thing that I think from feedback from people is, the examiner, I may have come across them before, they're very impassive. It's very difficult to know whether I've done well or not. Well, most places, certainly the places where I've been an examiner, we are specifically guided to be impassive and not to let slip anything by that might be construed as a signal of doing well or doing badly. If you are being examined by someone you know, don't be surprised if they are that much more serious, that they are very much to the point. They're not going to necessarily even have a smile or a chat, because that could be construed by some candidates to be expressing a bias or favoritism or acknowledging to a candidate how well they have done. So in all honesty, as an examiner, it's not a very interesting day because you have to keep that impassive face and make sure we're picking up on all the right cues to be able to examine a candidate appropriately and successfully. As a candidate, acknowledge that may put you off, but as best as you can, just ignore the fact the examiner is in the room and just concentrate on your interaction with the patient. And if you do have to interact with the examiner because you're going to be asked specific questions by them, then, or you need to summarize the case, then don't look for subtleties in how they are responding, because they will be trying their hardest to not give anything away, whether you were good, bad, or indifferent. And the final point along those lines, if you do have to, at the end of an assessment, make some kind of statement to the examiner, maybe summarize your findings, or even, to be fair, if you're doing that back to the patient, please stand still, put both feet flat on the ground. That will help literally ground you, give you more stability, means you fiddle around less, and it will give you more confidence in how you summarize your case. That confidence is going to be very key. Like I say, it's not going to pass or fail exactly how you come across, because we're going to examine you on the content. But there will be sections in the exam that will be affected by candidates who come across as being very nervous or unsure of themselves, especially if you have a candidate who has perhaps been borderline in other areas. It's my feeling and my perception from my experience and talking to other examiners that those little bits and some of the other things we've talked about can just sway you to, well, is this person not quite good enough in how they come across professionally? They may have some of the content there, it's not been perfect. Is there something else going on that is going to pull them up or drag them down? And it's these softer aspects of watching someone in a clinical situation that's going to be really important. And even though this is very specifically aimed at exams, like I said right at the start, the way that we behave in exams is a reflection on how people are in real life, because that's how most exams are structured now, to replicate that. And we know from evidence that people who perform badly in these replications of clinical encounters will be less well perceived as a clinician by patients, and they may also be less accurate in their clinical assessment. So it's worthwhile spending some time thinking clearly about the content of how you examine someone and the knowledge that you need to demonstrate and the skills, but also think about those behaviors, about how you act in front of the examiner and in front of the patient, as it may just tip you over the edge into coming across more confident and performing better in your exam. Hello, and thank you for listening to the Kindness, Curiosity and Comfortable Shoes podcast. This episode is entitled Refocus, because I am going to be pausing this podcast just to refocus some things in my working life and the trajectory of JMAC education. So, as the last podcast for a while in Kindness, Curiosity and Comfortable Shoes, I thought it would be interesting to discuss what you need to refocus on. I think it's easy for work, and I guess the NHS probably isn't alone in this, that for any aspect of work you will have a number of tasks, projects, commitments that just seem to keep on expanding with very few things falling off the other end. And in my mind, it happens for three reasons. Firstly, you may be doing work that you are interested in. Clearly, that's the most joyful work if it's powered from within. Secondly, there may be work that you feel you ought to do that is a part of your role, part of your job description. And finally, there may be work that is delegated to you, and perhaps that's the area of work that we will engage least well with. And for those aspects of work, there's often no specific end date or time. And I guess even for a project that you think's completed, someone will come back and want you to reassess, re-audit, update the team. I think this happened a lot to me when I was in my consultant career and having to investigate incidents, and suddenly you'd find that something landed in your inbox that needed a lot of unexpected work. Need to rearrange my time around that to fit in with certain deadlines. I guess I quite like the challenge of that suddenly turning up, and definitely feel a sense of accomplishment once it was completed, once I had filled in all the appropriate forms for the investigation, spoken to the key people, fed back to other people involved in the incident, presented at various committees, and then suddenly it would go quiet. And then insanely, months and sometimes years down the line, because my name was still attached to a project, more work would appear for it. If you end up in a situation where there's suddenly more work, whether it is driven by yourself or externally, I think it's useful to spend some time thinking about the answer to two specific questions. Firstly, what is important? And secondly, what are your values? That kind of internal importance, I guess. So what's important? The things that may be important to your role, to your department, to the people that you report to, your seniors. Clearly in the NHS, it may well be your patients. Understanding what is important to them will help you focus on how to manage tasks. And secondly, as I say, what are your values? To work out the specifics about what is important to you. How does this new piece of work align with the values that I hold, the things that I want to be doing and progressing in my career? So two useful questions to help you update your goals. And when there's something that you are adding in, if it does align with your values and importance, then there needs to be something else that goes, something that comes off the other end, because you can't keep exponentially adding to your workload. So if there's something that you are asked to do, and you know you have to do it for whatever reason that may be, think, how does that affect your current workload and your current goals? And if appropriate, you may have to ask, okay, if I take this new task on, what shall I stop doing so I can focus on that task? It's a question that we often feel bad about asking, maybe embarrassed about asking, but we can't keep adding to our workload. So there's new things that we need to do. What do we need to stop doing? It's something we commonly felt in the emergency department when new aspects of clinical care were added to our workload from the numerous specialties that we work with. We often have meetings or discussions. There's just this one thing we need to add for this one group of patients. And by itself, it's quite a small aspect maybe. But we felt, and it's probably the same in every specialty, you interact with a lot of different specialties, mean lots of different things happen across the board that add to that workload. So it may be helpful to ask, well, that's fine, we can focus on this area, but that means by doing that and doing that well, we will have less time to focus on other areas that previously have been important. So what is it that we are going to decide we're going to stop doing so we can focus on this new task? Really nice to air those thoughts rather than for other areas of care and workload to deteriorate because we have a new focus. And whether we have to do that or not, there are always going to be critics. There are always going to be people who are discussing, hopefully with yourself, but possibly to others about your work. Well, why have you stopped? Why is this not important anymore? So it's nice to have a reason behind any shift in what you do. Really nice to lean into that autonomy, and if that change is questions, that you stand by your decision and are comfortable with how you are managing your own workload. That's really key to satisfaction at work, having that autonomy. So for me and the KCC podcast, I've loved doing this podcast, and from the feedback I get, it appears it is useful and interesting for many of you, and it is going to continue in some form in the future. But for now, I'm refocusing what I do as part of JMAC Education, and I've been conscious that Kindness, Curiosity and Comfortable Shoes as a podcast is quite a wide remit, and I set it up to explore podcasting as an educational medium. what I'm going to be doing over the next few months is really focusing on producing content and resources to help those specifically in education, in healthcare. So that may well apply to you. So if you are involved in any teaching or education, as I said on the education episode, I think that it should really be all of us. There will be some things that you'll find on the social media updates and various things that I'm going to produce to help you progress and understand a bit more about education without necessarily going down a full formal qualification. So please keep up to date with at JMac Education to find out more about that. And please keep subscribed to the Kindness, Curiosity and Comfortable Shoes podcast so you will be alerted to when the next episode is published. And thank you all very much for listening. Thank you for listening today. There are links in the show notes for information that I've referred to in the show. And if you enjoyed the show and want to help the podcast grow and expand, then please support me and the show and head to buymeacoffee.com/jmaceducation. That's buymeacoffee, all one word, .com/jmaceducation and support the podcast there. Or if you're listening on the podcast website at kccpodcast.buzzsprout.com, click on the heart on the top right of the page, or click on the support the show link in the show notes. It's also really helpful for me if you rate, review, like, follow, share, subscribe, whatever's appropriate on whichever platform you're listening on. Again, it really does help grow the show. Thank you. So please take care of yourselves out there. You are doing a great job. And remember, be kind, be curious, and don't forget your comfortable shoes. Thank you to Shekinah Studio for the music, downloaded through Audio Jungle. Thank you to Beth for the artwork and the photo, produced through Canva. And thank you to Buzzsprout for hosting the podcast. The Kindness, Curiosity and Comfortable Shoes podcast is a JMac Education production.